Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Tes contains two Mishnayos. In fact, each Amud, each side of the page begins with a Mishnah. The first Amud is a Mishnah and Gemara on it discussing whether or not a sukkah has to be made lishma, how we derive the halacha, whether it has to be made lishma or not, and how it compares to tzitzis, whether that has to be made lishma. The second Amud discusses a sukkah on top of another sukkah, whether that's kosher or possible in what circumstances, and the source of the psukim that is a psul as well, if it is. Okay, so let's begin the first Mishnah. Mishnah discusses whether or not a sukkah has to be made lishma. Lishma meaning for the purpose of being used as the sukkah's mitzvah, for the mitzvah of the yontif of sukkah. So the Mishnah is a machlokes Beisil on Beishamai. Beisil says flatly a sukkah does not have to be made lishma. Whatever you make it for, even if you did not make it l'shem sukkah's mitzvah at any time, it's kosher. We shall see that it has to be made l'shem tzel, for shade, not just for privacy, but that's not in this Mishnah here. Beis Hillel says it does not have to be made l'shem mitzvah at all. Beis Shammai, however, says it does have to be made l'shem mitzvah, and there are two potential ways that it could qualify as being made l'shem mitzvah. One is simply if you made it at any time with the intent of being used for the mitzvah of sukkah. The second way is if it was made within 30 days of Yom Tov. If it was made within 30 days, even if you did not have in mind specifically that it's to be used for the sukkah, it is automatically considered to be made for the mitzvah of sukkah itself, unless of course you had specific intent for something else. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know what is the source of Beis Shammai's halacha that a sukkah has to be made l'shma. So Gemara says because the pasuk describing the mitzvah of sukkah says chag sukkah shevas yamim l'Hashem. So it says you should make the sukkos l'Hashem. The sukkos should be l'Hashem, has to be made for the mitzvah of Hashem. Okay, now what is Beis Hillel going to do with that? So Beis Hillel says that's to teach me a different halacha. That's to teach me that the parts of the sukkah have kedusha. That throughout the yontif of sukkah itself, they're set aside and not allowed to use it for anything else. We also see that it's compared to a carbon chagiga. Carbon chagiga is an extra carbon brought on every Yom Tov for people to be mesamech, to enjoy, to eat the meat of the carbon shlamim it is. And the carbon chagiga has kedusha. You're not allowed to eat that meat until its matir is brought, until the parts that go on the mizbeach are brought. So here it compares the chagiga because it says chag, it compares that to sukkos. So these two things, again, both in this one pasuk itself, show me that the sukkah, the wood, the boards of the sukkah has kedusha. So that's what Beis Hillel uses this pasuk for. So Gemara says, well, where is Beis Shammai going to get that halacha from? And the Gemara agrees, and Gemara says, yes, you're right, Beis Shammai is going to learn it from there too. Beis Shammai must have a different pasuk for the source of the halacha that the sukkah has to be made l'shma, and that's the pasuk of chag hasukkos taseh lecha shivas yamim. So Rashi says you cut the pasuk up and change the words in order, and it's the sukkahs should be for lishma. It should be lecha. It should be for the mitzvah of the sukkah itself. Now, Beis Hillel uses this pasuk to teach me that you're allowed to make a sukkah on Chalamayid, on Yom Tov itself, even if you didn't make a sukkah before Yom Tov, and you're allowed to make chag sukkah taseh shivas yamim. You're allowed to do it all 7 days. Where it says Beis Shammai does not hold of that halacha. This is a machlokes Tanoim coming up in Daf Chav Zayin. Beis Shammai holds you're not allowed to build a sukkah on Chalamayid. Okay, so these are the sources. So now the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda, the Amora Rav Yehuda, said in the name of Rav that tzitzis has to be made lishma. He also said that he sent it over to Shmuel, and Shmuel says not only does the tzitzis strings have to be put on the tzitzis lishma, but the tzitzis strings themselves have to be spun from the wool lishma. Now Rav did not agree with that, but either way we see that tzitzis has to be put on lishma. Now putting the strings on the tzitzis is like building a sukkah. You're not doing a mitzvah there. It's creating the device, the tools to be able to fulfill the mitzvah by sitting in the sukkah or by putting the tzitzis on. So if Rav and Shmuel both hold that tzitzis has to be made lishma, they should also hold that the sukkah has to be made lishma. That's Gemara's kasha. Gemara just quotes Rav's statement in full. He says that if you make tzitzis from something which is already on the cloth, it doesn't count. It has to be attached to the cloth lishma. And he gives 4 examples, 3 that are no good and 1 that is good. 3 that are no good is bits of string that stick out from where you knotted the strings as part of the weaving, thread that you sewed something on and the bits of thread are hanging, or embroidery fringes that are hanging from the end as an embroidery around the edging of the cloth itself. All these strings that stick off the tzitzis, since they weren't attached to the tzitzis as part they weren't attached to the cloth as the mitzvah of tzitzis, they're just there anyway. The problem with them is that they weren't put on l'shem tzitzis. Now, obviously, the fact that they are the same cloth, it's part of the cloth, that is not a problem. The problem is that it did not become fringes for the purpose of tzitzis. Now, one situation which is kosher is if you take a ball of wool and it's a ball of thread, and you take some of those threads and you attach them on, that's Machokas Rav and Shmuel. Via Rav says it's kosher, even though it wasn't spun for tzitzis, and Shmuel says it's possible because it has to also be spun for tzitzis. Now, but anyway, we see a kasha here that Rav and Shmuel both seem to be saying that you need to make a lishma, but Beisol holds you don't have to make a lishma. So the Gemara says it's not a problem. By tzitzis is an extra pasuk that tells me that tzitzis does have to be made lishma that you don't have by sukkah. What does it say by tzitzis? It says gedilim taseh lecha. You should make tzitzis for you. Lecha lechayvcha. You should be done for the purpose of fulfilling your obligation. The Gemara says by sukkah, it says the same thing. It says chag sukkos taseh lecha. L'shem chavcha, you should have the same drasha. We still don't see a difference here between tzitzis and sukkah. So Gemara answers, no, that pasuk by sukkah is teaching me something else. That pasuk is to teach you that it has to be l'cha, it has to be yours, it can't be stolen. That's what that's for. The Gemara says, well then, why don't you say that the one by tzitzis is also teaching me that it has to be yours and not stolen? Again, it should be the same. Tzitzis and sukkah are the same. The Gemara says, no. As far as the tzitzis, I have a different pasuk that tells me that it doesn't have to, that has to be yours and it can't be stolen, because it says asu lahem tzitzis, lahem mishalahem, it has to be theirs. Therefore, the pasuk of l'cha is not to tell me that it can't be stolen; it's to tell me that it has to be done l'chayvcha, l'shem chayv, it has to be done l'shma. Sukkah does not have a pasuk to tell me that it does not have to be, that it can't be stolen besides for l'cha. Therefore, l'cha is to tell me that it can't be stolen, and there is no pasuk remaining to tell me that it has to be l'shma, and therefore it does not have to be l'shma. That's Beisol's approach. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. Mishnah discusses the halacha of a sukkah underneath another sukkah. Now, the halacha, the Mishnah says, is that a sukkah underneath many things has a psal. A sukkah under a sukkah is puzzle, even though what's on top of it is another layer of kasher schach. You cannot have two layers, one on top of the other, even if the top layer is kasher schach. Now, you also can't have something on top of it which is puzzle schach. That would knock out the schach that you have. So therefore, the Mishnah says as follows. You make a sukkah under a tree. Tree is a puzzle schach because the only thing that's allowed to be schach is something which is detached from the ground, something which grew from the ground and then is detached from the ground. Or, the Mishnah says, if you make sukkah inside your house under the roof is also puzzle schach, so that's no good. Or even if you make a sukkah under another sukkah, there you have two sukkahs, that's kasher schach on top of kasher schach, but another layer of kasher schach is a psul on top of the layer of schach that you have. Now, Rav Yehuda says that if the top sukkah, okay, you have two sukkahs, one on top of the other, if the top sukkah doesn't have any dwellers, the Gemara will explain that means that it's not fitting for anybody to dwell, then it's kosher. It doesn't count as a sukkah under a sukkah itself. Okay, so now, first the Gemara focuses on the halacha of a sukkah under a tree, and then the Gemara focuses on the halacha of a sukkah under a sukkah. So a sukkah under a tree. So the Gemara says that it's only true that the sukkah is possible if the tree that's leaning over it is more shade than sun. That way it counts as schach, and it counts as pasal schach. It counts as a roof, and it's a pasal roof, and therefore it messes up this sukkah itself. The Gemara says that shouldn't make sense. Because even if it's not kasher schach, every branch that's growing from the ground, every branch that's attached to a tree that's growing from the ground, pasals the schach that's directly under it. Therefore, a very high percentage or significant percentage of the schach in your sukkah is pasal. If you were to delete, you were to make invisible and discount all the schach that has a branch on top of it, you may not have enough kasher schach in the bottom, in the schach that you have. That means as follows. You have a regular sukkah with a tree overhanging it. Yeah? Even if that tree is more sun than shade, it does not provide a lot of shade. However, every branch that's on top of a piece of schach in the sukkah is pasal and is considered non-existent. If you add up all the non-existent parts plus the gaps in the schach itself, you may end up with majority of your sukkah schach being no good. Part of it is not there because you anyway don't have to have more sun than you anyway do not have to have a complete schach. You only have to have more shade than sun. But when you take away the schach that has branches directly over it, branches connected to the tree, you'll end up with pasal schach. So it should be pasal even if the tree that's hanging over it is more sun than shade, and it's not enough. It's not a thick enough layer to count as schach had it been kosher schach. The Gemara answers, the Gemara says no. The case that we're talking about, where it's kosher, if there's a tree hanging over the sukkah that's more sun than shade, is where the branches of the tree were lowered, they were pulled down, and were intertwined with the actual schach that's on top of the sukkah itself. Therefore, it's all mixed into one mass, and in that mass, the minority is batal in the majority, and we discount it. So therefore, since this is more sun than shade, it's obviously a minority of the schach of the sukkah, which is more shade than sun, and therefore doesn't count as anything. It's completely discounted. Gemara says that halacha, if it's completely discounted, why is that a chiddush? That's what you're coming to tell me, and this whole thing came from Rava, was a statement of Rava. What's chiddush there? Of course, we know that the minority is but on the majority. Gemara says the chiddush is that you shouldn't make exera. You may make exera that you shouldn't have any tree overhanging your sukkah at all. We don't make exera. The Gemara says, what do you mean? We learned that in the Mishnah as well. The Mishnah is pretty clear about that. The Mishnah says, if somebody has a grapevine or a pumpkin plant or some kind of ivy growing, and he raises it up and has it grow on top of his sukkah, so if he wants to make it kosher, he can either cut it off or have more kosher schach than pasul schach. So says the Gemara, obviously this is talking about where the branches are intertwined and mixed together. Otherwise, it wouldn't help if you have more kosher schach than pasul schach, because we would have the same problem. A part of the kosher schach is knocked out by the pasul schach that's on top of it. So it has to be that's the same scenario. And again, it says the same halacha. So what's your chiddush? Gemara says no. The chiddush is you're allowed to do it even lechatchila. Here it only says that you're allowed to, that b'di eved is kosher. If you have a situation like that, it is kosher. Rava was coming to tell you you are lechatchila allowed to have that tree over your sukkah as long as its branches are intertwined and it's batal, the branches that are growing are batal in the schach that's detached from the ground and put on top of your sukkah itself. The Gemara now goes into the halachos of a sukkah on top of another sukkah. The Gemara will show the source of the psul. It's a psul de'oraisa. Learned that from a pasuk. And the Gemara will discuss 4 different scenarios of a sukkah on top of a sukkah with 4 different possible halachos. So the Brisa says as follows: a sukkah cannot be built under a sukkah or under a tree or under a house, roof, under anything, because the Torah says basukkah is teshu. Somebody says basukkah is teshu. That should seem to indicate that you're allowed to have a sukkah on top of a sukkah, because it says basu. It says plural basukkah. It says you should sit in sukkahs. That sounds like if I sit in 2 sukkahs at once, meaning I have one on top of the other, that's kosher. Gemara says yeah, but it's spelled besukkas. It's spelled without any vavs. That's the spelling is lashon yachid in the singular form, and that it teaches you're only allowed to sit in 1 sukkah at a time. So a sukkah on top of a sukkah is pasul. Now the psul, the rule here is that if you have a kosher layer of schach on top of another kosher layer of schach, that's the psul. So if I have a sukkah on top of a sukkah, but one of the layers of schach is pasul, then that won't be a problem. Even though there's a layer of schach there, if it doesn't count as a kosher sukkah, again, it's not pasul schach, it's kosher schach, but it doesn't count as a kosher sukkah, it will not be a psul of sukkah under a sukkah. It's interesting because it comes out like this. If I have my regular sukkah and there's something on top of it which is pasul schach, that messes up my sukkah. If it's a kosher sukkah, it also messes up my sukkah. If it's kosher schach but a pasul sukkah, then it's no problem, because it's not any problem of having a pasul schach on top of my schach, and it's not any problem of having another sukkah on top of my schach. It's just kosher schach on top of kosher schach. That's okay. So the Gemara now defines 4 cases. There's a case in which both sukkahs, if you have a sukkah on top of a sukkah, there's a case in which both are pasul. There's a case in which both are kosher. There's a case in which only the top one's kosher and the bottom one's pasul, and a case in which only the bottom one is kosher and the top one is pasul. So what are these cases precisely? So the Gemara spells it out as follows. They're both kosher. That's if the bottom sukkah has a layer of schach which is incomplete. It does not provide as much shade as the sun. It's more sun than shade, therefore it doesn't count as anything. You could ignore it. And as long as the top schach is within 20 amas of the floor, it counts as the schach for both sukkahs, because there is no real 2 sukkahs here. The bottom sukkah is not a sukkah, and therefore the entire structure is kosher because of the schach at the top, as long as it's again within 20 amas of the floor. Now, we already have a situation in which the 2 sukkahs are both pasul. That is, if both are kosher sukkahs. That means that the top one is more shade than sun schach, and the bottom one is also more shade than sun. So the bottom one is possible because it has a sukkah on top of it, and the top one is possible would be if it sticks up higher than 20 amos. Rashi says it has to be 20 amos from its floor, meaning from the schach of the bottom sukkah all the way up to the schach of the top sukkah. That has to be more than 20 amos. So the bottom one is possible because it's under a layer of schach, and the top one is possible because it is schach that is too high. It's not a kosher sukkah, so therefore it's pasul schach. Pasul schach passes the entire structure. You can't just ignore it because it is a layer of schach there. Now, what's the situation in which the bottom one is kosher and the top one is pasul? So this is we have to be careful with this one. The Gemara says the bottom one has regular schach, the top one has chamasa meruba mitzilasa. It has more, its layer of schach is too sparse. It has more sun than shade. Therefore, the top one doesn't count at all, and the bottom one counts fine. Now, the Gemara says you have to be careful here, because it has to be that the top one is within 20 amos. If the top one be above 20 amos, that would be pasul schach. That pasul schach would knock out any schach under it, because it itself is pasul schach. So it's got to be that it's kosher schach. It's just not a kosher sukkah. So its kosher schach has to be within 20 amos of the floor, and it has to be within 20 amos of the sukkah beneath it, and it has to be that it is not its own layer of kosher sukkah schach, because it is more sun than shade. In that situation, it would be the bottom sukkah would be kosher, because you don't have to worry about the schach that's on top of it. It doesn't count. It's kosher schach material, and it's not a kosher layer of schach because it's too thin. Now, if, however, the schach would be too high, it would be more than 20 amos tall, that would count as pasul schach, and that pasul schach would knock out some of the schach under it, and we would then have to be concerned that you do not have a complete layer of thick enough kosher schach. Now, what's the situation in which the top one is kosher and the bottom one is pasul? The Gemara says it's simple. It's where you have two complete layers of schach. The top one is kosher because it's not underneath anything wrong. The bottom one is kosher, is pasul because it's a classic sukkah under a sukkah, and it is two kosher layers of schach, and therefore the top one passes the bottom one. The Gemara says, what is the chiddush of all these halachas? These are all just doing the math for me. I could figure it out myself. The Gemara says the chiddush is in the third case we said, where the bottom one is kosher and the top one is pasul because the top one is too sparse. You may have thought we should make it gzeira. We should say, listen, it's very easy to get confused if the top layer is more than 20 amos or less than the 20 amos. We said if it's higher than the 20 amos, it passes the bottom one, and if it's less than 20 amos, the bottom one is kosher. You may think to make gzeira, the chiddush here is to teach me you do not have to make gzeira.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.